everyone. My name is Tamara Starr, and I'm the Director of Communications and Publications for Women's Federation for World Peace International. It gives me great pleasure to welcome those who are able to join us today for this webinar and launch of WFWP Perspectives, a digital platform that will showcase distinguished leaders who are creating an impact within their field or within their community. This is an initiative in line with the values of Women's Federation for World Peace. Founded in 1992, it has active chapters and humanitarian service projects in more than 120 countries worldwide and has been a general consultative status with ECOSOC since 1997. WFWP empowers women of all ages to realize their potential as peace builders through education, leadership development, advocacy, partnership, reconciliation, and humanitarian service, with a special focus on the family as the primary social unit for all societies. WFWP aims to create an environment of peace and well-being for future generations and people of all races, cultures, and religious creeds. In this spirit, we are delighted to be launching WFWP Perspectives with family literacy in the time of COVID-19, impacts now and moving forward, with Dr. Denny Taylor. She is an author, academic, and activist, and she's continuously engaged in research with families living in extreme poverty and in regions of armed conflict and natural catastrophes since 1977. The concept of family literacy originates in her doctoral research, which is now being used by many UN member states in local projects and initiatives that are a conduit for peace building and for addressing the many problems and challenges that are captured by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Dr. Taylor's transdisciplinary research combines anthropology, sociology, psychology, and education, which crosses over into the physical sciences in her research on the impact of the climate emergency on families and communities. She's the author of many field-based award-winning books that are used by universities throughout the world. Most recently, Denny Taylor founded Garn Press, through which he mentors writers of conscience and publishes books by teachers and scientists that address some of the most urgent global issues. In 2019, she received Columbia's Distinguished Alumni Award and NCRLL's Distinguished Scholar Award for her lifetime of research. Most of her research is in the Commons and can be accessed for download on her website, www.dennytaylor.com. During this webinar, Dr. Taylor will first present about family literacy. Following her presentation, one of our international vice presidents, Alexa Ward, will join Dr. Taylor for a discussion. The event will conclude with a question and answer period. Those of you who are joining us on Zoom can go ahead and submit your questions to Dr. Taylor through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And now, it is with great pleasure that we welcome up Dr. Denny Taylor.
Hello, everybody. I think I'm up and we're running. I just want to welcome everybody, and I just say how grateful I am to the Women's Federation for World Peace International, and especially to Alexa Fish-Ward for her leadership and her kindness. And it's a pleasure working with Tamara Starr, Director of Communications, and Grace Kellett, Administrator and UN Representative for WFWP International. I just want to thank the whole team. It has been an extraordinary experience, and I'm very grateful to them. So this is a moment in time when many families around the world are mourning the loss of a loved one, and we hope that by being together and sharing common purpose, that this webinar brings comfort to us all. We are intent on creating opportunities for everyone who is participating to gain deep understandings of family literacy and the impact on families of adverse experiences and mass trauma. We would like to start a global conversation focused on the rights of families wherever they live in the world, a conversation that also provides practical information on ways families can be supported during the pandemic. It is inspiring testimony to the universal applicability of family literacy that UN member states, the UN, NGOs, the medical and private sectors, and academia, teachers and parents often form partnerships in family literacy initiatives. The beneficiaries are families, especially women and children, displaced families, asylum seekers, refugees, survivors of armed conflict, and families in recovery from weather-related catastrophes, and now COVID-19 pandemic. The ethnographic family research on which this webinar is based includes studies on 3 continents with families in diverse racial, ethnic, and religious groups living in poverty in rural, urban, and suburban settings, in prisons and refugee camps. Studies of the aftermath of catastrophic events includes mining disasters, extreme weather events, including Katrina, Rita, and Sandy, chemical and nuclear disasters, 9/11, mass shootings, including Sandy Hook massacre and the international armed conflict. All of that's the groundwork for, especially for the slides that we will focus on in a moment. But let's focus now on the ways that families have responded to past catastrophic events and disasters, and ask the question, what can we learn from their responses to previous emergencies that help us as we focus on the global pandemic that confronts us. So our mission is to explore some of the actions that we can take to support families and help them push down the risks for themselves and for other families living in local communities and around the world. It's always good to include a story, and I have chosen to share a story with you about a class I taught the night after 9/11. The class was on family literacy. So the day after September 11th, when the Twin Towers fell, the class met and we discussed cancelling. I had no idea how to go forward, but my students were unanimous that they wanted to stay and share what had happened to them that day. Some students taught in schools where they could see the Twin Towers from their classroom windows, and children in their classes saw the first plane hit and also watched the second tower fall as it fell. All the graduate students had children in their classes who knew children in their schools who had family members who were missing, and later some of them were found to have not survived. On that night, students shared their experiences, and they had the task that they'd been given was to bring 3 literacy treasures, family literacy treasures that had deep meaning in their families. So once they had shared, some sat silent, many of them actually shared what was happening in their classrooms. They shared their treasures. Each semester, students bring poems, prayers, letters from grandparents, I love you notes, and ticket stubs to baseball games and newspaper cuttings. The list is endless, and every treasure, there comes a family story that the students tell. But in this moment, which was beyond comprehension, when everyone cried, there was also laughter amongst the tears. The semester, the treasures became more poignant, more heartfelt, more joyful, and more funny. Students were empathetic. They listened to each other tell their family stories as if they were the most important stories they had ever told. That night, one of the students shared a Russian matryoshka doll with dolls inserted inside each other. Her grandmother had given it to her, and when she had vacationed in Russia and the year before, and her grandmother had since died. She said she had never got to the last doll until that night. And when she did, just before she came to class, she found a tiny piece of paper folded in the tiniest doll. The students watched as she took each doll from inside another until she reached a doll so small it didn't seem possible that there could be a piece of paper inside it, but there was. Carefully, the student unfolded it and said, I didn't know it was there, she said again. She showed the class the tiniest writing of her grandmother had written, I love you. It was magical, the room filled with sorrow. It was as if hope had found a way into everyone's hearts and minds. At the end of every class, students wrote in blue books, which was supposed to be for exams, but as I've never given an exam, I used them so that we could write back and forth to each other. And one student wrote, "I have 2 children in my first grade class who have lost someone dear to them, and my heart goes out to them. I'm not even sure when I will see them again." She said that what had happened to these 2 children was a shock. And then she said, "This class tonight made family the most important thing in the world. My family has always meant everything to me, and every day I value my life more and more." I always like to hear stories from people because it lets you know that we are the same. We feel, we think about family in different ways. Even though our experiences are different, I truly learned from everyone here tonight. When the students arrived the following week, they were unanimous that our class of sharing both their stories from the day of 9/11 and also sharing their family literacy treasures had made a huge difference to them going back into the classroom. For the rest of the semester, when we began each class with time for students to talk, they had time to talk about what was happening in their classrooms, how they were dealing with 9/11 and the aftermath of the event. And then we would go on with the activities that were part of the class. And 201, they said that the experience helped them get through. This story reminds us that we must support teachers and parents so they can foster resilience in children. And I really want to talk about that for just a minute. To foster resilience in children, it's important that we do everything we can to support families and create schools as safe, joyful places. Children need to be playful before catastrophes take place. If children are going to have a maximum opportunity to recover from potentially traumatizing experiences, they must feel safe. Their lives must be predictable and they must have fun. 2 important research findings support the establishment of family literacy initiatives when catastrophic events take place. The first finding is that the social fabric of children's everyday lives must be restored if children and their families are to have the best chance possible to recover when a catastrophic event takes place. The second finding is that children and their families need to experience joy if they are going to have the best chance possible to recover from trauma. The psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk emphasizes the importance of establishing safety and competence for children who have experienced complex traumas. He writes, "Complexly traumatized children need to be helped to engage their attention in pursuits that do not remind them of the trauma-related triggers that give them have experiences that give them a sense of pleasure and mastery. Safety, predictability, and fun are essential in the establishment of the capacity to observe what is going on and to put it all in a larger context. Only after children have developed the capacity to focus on pleasurable activities do they have a chance to develop the capacity to play with other children, engage in simple group activities, and deal with more complex issues. So it's really critical at this moment in time. We're going to transition now into a PowerPoint that I've created for the webinar. We will focus on the family as the first organizing principle of all human societies, and the family literacy as deeply embedded in the social fabric of everyday life. And that family literacy is an essential element of initiatives to protect and advance human well-being. Family literacy also has an important role in ecological recovery and protecting the planet. I think that let me just tell you just for a second something about this PowerPoint. It's taken about 2 months to put it together. There's about 2,000 research articles behind it and many, many photographs. It's longer than I'm going to be able to talk about, so I hope you'll forgive me if some slides I go through really quickly. But this PowerPoint is for everyone who is participating in the webinar, and I'm hoping that you'll have time to spend time with the PowerPoint, and that there will be information here that you can use. If you're teaching, you can use it in your teaching. If you are working with an NGO, you might want to come together to look at the slides and think about the role that family literacy plays in our everyday lives. So for families, COVID-19 is the biggest public health crisis since 1918, and it is changing not only the ways families live, but also the ways parents care for their children, which is why that beginning presentation, the story of 9/11 and how the teachers coped, and the information about children and trauma is so important. I love this picture because it's in Mumbai and everyone is living in, they're in a high rise, and I live in a building in Manhattan that has 623 apartments, and we fill a whole block in Manhattan. And so it doesn't matter if you're in Mumbai or if you're in Manhattan, we are all at home, sheltering in place. And how do we talk to our children about going back to school or staying home? There's so many questions. So in every country, and I just wanted to make sure we focused a little bit, recognizing the work of healthcare workers. In Manhattan, in New York City, nurses and doctors have been doing 24-hour shifts, and many of them have been sleeping in hotel rooms or campers. And one of the nurses that I read a report on said, "I feel guilty not being there for my husband and children. My son is only 5 and I don't want to get either of them sick." And so we're back into that first presentation of children who have had adverse life experiences. So all of a sudden, the separation from the child's mother. So a remarkable fact is that already family literacy initiatives in local, regional, and global contexts focus on public health emergencies that impact the health and well-being and even the survival of vulnerable families. Whoops, we went by very quick. So there are 3 areas of literacy that I wanted you to think about this morning. The first is that we learn language, and many of the literacy programs that are developed are to teach reading, and those are really important, but it's only one aspect of literacy, and we often forget that we also use literacy in all kinds of, it's deeply embedded in our lives. Again, going back to that story, and the piece of family literacy that interests me so much is that family literacy is used to frame peace-enhancing initiatives in the UN member states. I got through 140 countries analyzing the family literacy programs that are there. So family literacy initiatives have been documented that include the global pandemic and other public health emergencies, political upheaval, violent conflict, environmental stresses, and biodiversity loss. You can read the rest of the slide. So we're not only using family literacy as a way to teach literacy, which is reading and writing, which is really important, especially for women and girls around the room, but family literacy is using to address very serious problems in communities in nearly every country in the world. So the peacekeeping is important, but so is that family literacy is integral to and in keeping with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we can talk about that a little later. I think that when Alexa Ward and I talk, we will focus a little bit on the peacekeeping and also on the sustainable development. The thing that I also think is really important is that we understand, this is my favorite picture coming up, hopefully. Whoops, sorry. There. My finger is not on the button, it's jumping. There. So it's not going to, I apologize, I'm not quite sure why it went on, but Eleanor Roosevelt was absolutely critical to the development of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this quote to me is central to everything I do. The recognition of the inherent dignity and equal and inalien rights of members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. And we ignore that at our peril. So I'm advocating that every decision maker is aware that the family is the one common element we all share, and that it becomes the organizing principle for decisions that are made about human societies. For the most part, the family is no longer mentioned. I think it should be right at the top in everything that we discuss. I'm pressing down, but it's not going. Okay, oops. Our knowledge of language provides us with the impact also on the impact of the pandemic on families and communities in local contexts. One of the things that I think is the most exciting, it's hard to be excited in a pandemic, but the thing that has really impressed me is that COVID-19 has created the conditions for a global reading lesson. There are symbols and words that have become universal, creating collective understandings of the impact of the virus on families and communities around the world. So there's the watercolor of COVID, and there is it's a sculpture of COVID made of screws and pieces of metal. And we know what it is. So all of us can read that. That's a piñata. I'm not sure how I feel about the piñata. It seems to me that that's kind of using a cultural symbol in a way that makes me a little uncomfortable. But these are all symbols of COVID, and we can be anywhere on the planet and we would know what they are. Similarly, we know that these red dots are where there are outbreaks of the virus, and we know that for it doesn't matter where we are on the planet, we can read these images. So we know the meaning of images of hand washing and mask wearing. We can interpret pictorial images. Doesn't matter if we're in China or we're in the United States or any country in Europe. We understand what these images are. We know we have to wash our hands. We know that those green splotches are germs and probably COVID. This is a coffee filter. It's actually a mask that Melita is making using the machinery that makes their coffee filters. We know that that's a mask, even though it looks like a coffee filter. And we know that that gentleman is shedding the virus as he's walking along, and that we have to stop the spread and try to bend the curves, reduce the curves. And it doesn't, once again, it doesn't matter where we are. I cannot think of another occasion, event where we have this incredible commonality on a planetary scale, that we can read the same symbols. So we can see that language is generative, that we are constructing it, and that we are finding ways to interpret the virus, including we're having fun with it and making masks for our dogs. These dogs are in Philadelphia and they have masks on. And these are I didn't actually know what these are. If I'm see if I can go back. The PowerPoint seems to have its own agenda. They're wearing pool noodles on their heads in a cafe to make sure that they social distance. And here is a young man who is graduating, and we know how he's feeling. He says this is really scary and confusing time, and that image could be read anywhere in the world. This is an important, I put this slide together because saying that there's more than 140 countries doesn't really give us the same kind of image in our heads of what it means that there are family literacy programs in 140 and probably many more UN member states. But all of these countries focus in some way on family literacy. I wanted you to see a family literacy project around the world. I'm sorry, I'm not, it's going on its own. So here are children in South Africa. I love the South Africa project, and they all have dolls. And you could say, well, so what have the dolls got to do with literacy? But if you look, okay, I don't know why the slides are jumping, but they are. So here are two boys with their dolls. These boys take their dolls everywhere, even to school. They're reliable and present companions, which takes us back to Van der Kolk, how important it is that children are comfortable and feel secure. Oh. I hope you will forgive me for my slides jumping around. This is, again, okay. So here are the women who made the dolls, and it's part of the project that they're engaged in. And so this is a family literacy project. They have sponsored 75 books in Zulu for the family literacy project. And here is a child reading one of the Zulu titles. If you look in the next picture, there's one of the dolls. The child is reading and the doll is with her. And I love this photograph. If you look at the three children who are looking at the book, and the child on the far left holding one of the dolls that was made. So this whole idea of fun and security and academic learning language, all come together in the Family Literacy Project in South Africa. Okay. Learning from families who've experienced catastrophic events. We're thinking about COVID and reducing the risks, and you can read that at your leisure. And the goal is to use family literacy frameworks to help children with COVID, but also as that slide that flashed by what said is that those children, I took that photograph, they're in a war zone in an area of armed conflict, and those children need joyful experiences to be able to cope. There are many family literacy programs that are focusing in different countries around the world on migrant workers and refugees. And I just wanted to make sure we're aware of that. And hopefully we'll think more about the ways we can use family literacy to support them. Countries including Afghanistan, Nepal, and sub-Saharan Africa have village-based programs that seek to develop literacy in the context of community needs. That's the most important part of this, is that family literacy programs usually focus on the needs of the community and are locally driven. This is a child now in Afghanistan that was in the news it was in one of the newspapers that I was monitoring. Afghanistan has many family literacy programs working with children who have been traumatized by armed conflict. Many of those children are homeless, and during the lockdown, they are having trouble getting food. Okay. One of the things that's really important is that the students in my class wanted to talk about 9/11, and that's fine. But I didn't ask them to talk about it. They decided they wanted to. The most important part about working with children right now, doesn't matter where you are in the world, that they've been sheltering in place. They might have someone in their family who they might have lost a loved one, or they're separated because their family members are in the health services. So it's really important that you don't ask them directly unless you are trained to do so. And this was during a session with a social worker after Katrina, and children were asked to write. And this little girl wrote, "I feel sad, I saw people in the water." So always remember that we have memories that can trigger a traumatic event, experience that we've had 50 years later. I certainly do. And Eric Kandel was talking about crystal nut, and he still feels it. Again, child in Katrina, heart pounding, wobbly legs, and there's a rodent under his foot. Two important findings. The first is the social fabric. Everyday lives must be restored. It was where we began. And the second is that children need joyful experiences to recover from trauma. This is from one of my classes. So this is actually not the family literacy class, but it was a class on language and literacy. And I've always had family literacy nights, or nights when children come in and join their mothers or fathers and participate in events. And I just, anyone who's teaching, to encourage you to invite not only your students, but your grand students, because that's what we call them. These children are my grand students, to bring them in and to share experiences with them. This is from the same night. One of the children that you've just seen was painting herself, and so I took a photo. What's important about that experience is that if you are working with practitioners, really the practitioners themselves need to have the experience that they're then going to share with, whether it's families or it's children. They need to have that experience, and very little time is spent in any kind of training programs for educators that looks at teachers as first responders when disasters impact their families, the lives of children and their families. And so that's always part of my work. And this is from a class on painting pictures, writing pictures, painting stories. And the last day of class, we have this exhibit. It's actually a very deep philosophical class, and they read many philosophers on education, on language, on literacy. And so I included them because we need to get out of the box of thinking everything has to be either on a computer or some kind of test that has to be given at the end of the semester. It's just extraordinary what the presentations were that night. Whoops. Hopefully it's going to stay there. That's Ava, and we're going to hear a video in a second of her. Okay. And if you look at Ava, she's dressed as Vote for Women, and that's her great aunt Ginny, who was a suffragette and she fought for miners' rights in South Wales. and she's actually my aunt as well. I actually don't know Ava, but she is a distant cousin that I am getting to know. We are writing to each other, and she's going to make the transition. One of my cousins who is her great grandmother, sent me the video because she said that she is following in the footsteps of Ginny and then me, and now it's Ava, focusing on human rights. All right, we're going to watch that video in a minute. It will, I think it's a wonderful transition. She does a call to action. So one of the questions I was asked was, why is the video, what has it got to do with literacy? This little girl reads books on climate change. She's involved in cleaning up the environment, and she keeps notebooks on all the work that she does. So this is really the last of these slides, and I apologize that it was jumping. I'm not quite sure. I'm absolutely not quite sure why it was doing that, because it was jumping when I wasn't touching the buttons. So COVID-19 not only creates the conditions for a global reading lesson, the virus also creates the conditions for great transformations in all human societies. So important that we hold on to this idea that we are one family, and that if we were in Wuhan, we would understand many of the symbols that COVID has, the same symbols. We are using the same symbols. And my place in Manhattan, which is extraordinarily tiny, it's 550 square feet, could be in Mumbai. And families in Mumbai are having similar experiences to families that are living in this building. So we can transition to the video. My hope is that we can do that. So I'm going to, one last slide. We've learned that families can share experiences on a planetary scale, which is what I just said. And together we can create a common language that is understood wherever we live. Our task is now to take this universally shared experience and use it for the common good and a better world. I just think there is so much work that could be done to support families as they cope with COVID. If we thought about the ways in which family literacy programs have been in place for 40 years in nearly every country on the planet. So that's the end of the slides.
Hi everyone, I'm Ava, and this is what happened to our sea creatures. They're all dying because of plastic. People are littering, and we don't like that. This is a very important meeting. So, guess what's happening to our sea? It's plastic everywhere. And guess what? We are killing our animals, and I'm going to be responsible for myself, and you are, guys. Who is responsible? Us. If you see any, just say stop littering. It's hurting our animals. And whatever's happening to our ocean, we do not like it, because it's so dangerous to our animals, and maybe when I'm older they'll be extinct. And I'm going to do a litter clean in the Trend area. And I feel very strong in me, because this is a very important thing you must remember. This is very important to me. Please, please, please keep our beaches clean. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, that was amazing. And Ava was so cute. Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor, for that talk on family literacy. I hope that we all were able to get some good points, especially how children need to be able to feel joy and feel safe during a time of crises. So now we're going to transition into our discussion. So I would like to invite Dr. Taylor and one of our international vice presidents, Alexa Ward. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Denny, so much, really, for your sharing your insight, your experience, your wisdom, and also your passion for this area. It was very educational. Really appreciate it. So, a few points we could discuss during this time. One is I'd like to ask you to share a little bit about your story. So it was 40 years ago, if I'm correct, that you coined the phrase family literacy in your doctoral dissertation. Could you share with us how you came to choose this focus? What led up to this in your life?
Partly my teaching, but also I think my family experience. And I come from South Wales. My father went down the mines when he was 14. Both my grandfathers were coal miners. And I had a magical childhood, very much like Ava. Ava is now doing things and she's writing to me about things that I actually did as a child, which was mostly being up in the mountains during the day with other children and playing. But my experience as a child was of my grandmother cooking on the fire. I spent most of my time when I was very tiny. I slept in the bottom drawer of a chest of drawers. There was only 2 bedrooms upstairs and 2 rooms downstairs, and so I slept in a drawer put onto 2 kitchen chairs. So my childhood I feel is remarkable in that it takes me back almost into the 19th century, because the village hadn't changed in all that time. But it made for a difficult a time growing up, in that while we had a marvelous time and it was filled with story and song and poetry, in the larger arena in the UK, which is very class driven, I was not expected to finish school. I was not expected to go to college. And I was actually told by a head teacher that college was not for me. So rebellion for me was going to college. And I think it's an important part of this whole thing because, first of all, I relate to families who are really struggling. But for me, rebellion was becoming educated. And I was determined to do that. And so I taught in the East End of London. I had 43 5, 6, and 7-year-olds, and no aid. So we made books, and I invited their families into my classroom. After school, I would see mothers and uncles, and there were a number of children who had fathers who were in prison. And when they came, they were allowed out sometimes for visits. I would always invite the fathers to come into the room. So you have these very large English men sitting on tiny chairs with the children, reading stories to them. And so it was always the idea that school is not separate from home. And then when I got to America and I did a degree in psychology of reading, the separation of family from what we were doing in classes, it became very atomistic, skill-driven, psychological, and I found it very hard. And so I finished my master's degree, and I on one occasion, because I was talking to families, I was told that I was censured because in the clinic I was talking to families, and I was censured for doing so. And I just said, children do not take their families off with their coats. And so I've always had a sense of family, and then decided to go to Columbia. And the program was multi-disciplinary, so education, sociology, psychology. And I've since added linguistics and a few other things. And I went there to actually study literacy in families. I'm not quite sure why where it came from. But I think my experience of family, my experience of poverty, made me want to do something with families and literacy. And so that was how it began. And I was told that if I was going to coin this phrase, I had to be able to explain to people, I had to be able to define it. And so my dissertation was really trying to give an explanation that was scientific enough, rational enough, that it would be a dissertation. And so that's how it started, from my childhood, from teaching in London, all those children. How was I going to do that with 43 children if I didn't say to parents, you know, can you help me?
Right.
And it was very naive, the kinds of things I did. But we made books, we read, and I had 30 pounds a year for supplies, and I spent it all on books, and we made our books. And that was so all of those experiences, I think, are
very interesting beginning. Very interesting. What are the main ways that you see family literacy has developed over this 40-year period? Starting from where
in the United States, there was a shift from family literacy, observing families and supporting them, to being prescriptive, so going from descriptive to prescriptive. And we actually put together an international family literacy declaration of principles. I called up researchers from around the world, I mean literally around the world, and said, could you come and join us, because we're going to do this deed. And I didn't have any money, and they said okay. I only had one person that didn't come. So we had scholars from Europe, England, Australia, South America, Canada. Everyone flew in, and we focused on family, and came up with a declaration. It's still available. Declaration of principles on supporting families through literacy, and trying to get away from prescription, which is something that is unfortunate, that we went through a phase, and it could still be going on, where young women, if they came into the criminal justice system or into some situation similar, they would be told that they needed to attend a family literacy program. And so it went from being something marvelous and generative to being punitive. But around the world, and I honestly have not tried to monitor what's happening with family literacy around the world. And so when I started about 4 years ago, looking at where family literacy had gone, and I was just going from country to country, looking at the ways in which it has developed. And what excited me about that is that my own trajectory in my research is actually parallel with the trajectory of family literacy globally. And so this whole idea, and I'm sorry, I felt so badly because the slides were jumping, and I don't know why that was.
No worries.
So the idea that in many different countries with very different political systems, there are family literacy programs that focus on children who have experienced traumas of war. There are programs for military people coming home with PTSD. South Africa has, and some of the African family literacy programs are extraordinary. One of the ways in which information on HIV has been taken into villages in South Africa is through family literacy programs. So they've become very diverse and almost like a code for bringing families together to focus on the problem. The last piece of that was in that analysis is that it's clear that it has a role in peace building. And so
let's segue into that. Could you talk about the role of family literacy in the context of the United Nations? also in the context of peace building, and you, in your talk, you referred to the Sustainable Development Goals, but relevancy in those areas, since a lot of people who have joined us are engaged in the work at the UN at this time.
One of the things that really excited me was that there are parallels between the UN resolution adopted by the General Assembly in 2016, April 27th, on the United Nations peacebuilding architecture. And if you go through that architecture and look at the kinds of programs there are in family literacy, many of the family literacy programs are addressing the same principles that the United Nations peacebuilding architecture. So recognizing that peace is important. I mean, it's really the high cost of suffering used by armed conflict. I won't go through them all, but the struggle for a just and lasting peace, family literacy, there are programs that focus on each of these points, and I've written about them. If we look at individual programs in Afghanistan, for instance, there are programs that look at the psychosocial needs of women, of looking at war trauma and PTSD, child labor, family violence, programs for, and now moving to Bosnia, there are programs for socially excluded families. And so once you start looking at how they're I'm not defining them, they're being defined, and I'm documenting the ways in which I'm finding that they're defined, sometimes by local governments, but sometimes by UN agencies, and sometimes by local people. But local people have agency in thinking about the ways in which family literacy takes place in their particular community. So the thing that, what is so different about this than the ways in which every country, I think, governs, is that it's top down. The governing is always the decisions from the top. And this is people themselves recognizing there's a problem and addressing it, and using family literacy almost as a tool, as a way of coming together and focusing on whatever the issue is. And so the same as with for the Sustainable Development Goals. It's not that people say, let's have a family literacy program and we will focus on the family literacy goals. It's that they're having difficulty because they've experienced a catastrophic event and they want to support families, or they realize that that there is some aspect of their lives that they need, that has very much to do with sustainable development, that they need to focus on. And so it's much more organic than external objective. Here are the objectives, and we'll work with these families and we'll accomplish these things. It's that we don't have enough water, the drains aren't working, you know, we need sanitation. And so families come together to try and work those things out. And so it's kind of amazing to me that they talk about it in the context of family literacy. So I got really caught up in looking at all the different ways, and the UN is right in the middle of it. And probably
UNESCO's work a little bit. You referred.
I was just going to say, and probably because UNESCO took family literacy into a global arena, mostly in the early years, and probably still, UNESCO focuses on increasing literacy levels. So it's teaching women and young girls especially to read. And so all of the original programs focused on, we got learning to read, learning about reading, and learning through reading, or you can do it for writing or language. And so they were focusing on learning to read. And I'm saying that many of the programs now are focusing on using reading and writing, on literacy, to address a problem in a local community. And so there's a shift, but it's a shift within a theoretical framework that great linguists have studied and made their name. Michael Halliday, the learning to read, and then learning about reading, which is where we focus in this country. We pull language apart and get kids to focus on it. And then learning through literacy. And the most important of these is learning through literacy. Because whether it's wherever on the planet, our children are going to have to be incredible problem solvers. And so the learning through literacy, all of those programs are problem solving programs. And really that we need to bring that into our schools far more than it is. And so the UN has been absolutely instrumental. And all of this work, the people that need applauding are the UN and local governments, NGOs, all of the groups that are doing this work. That it has nothing to do at all with me. It's just out there. And it's really exciting.
Very exciting. Denny, if we can turn back to the family a little bit. I know there was one project concept you mentioned over the past few weeks that I would love to get you to talk to a little bit more, and that's the idea of family treasures. So family literacy through family treasures. Could you talk a little bit about that?
The family treasures was very much a part of that, the intro. And on the night after 9/11, that whole day, I had no idea what I was going to do when I went into that classroom. So that was the night they were bringing in their treasures. And so there's always this question about what's a treasure. And I always say a treasure is something that has no commercial value. So you don't bring a ring or something that you'll grab, even though it's important, mainly because you don't want children to do that. And there are all kinds of reasons not to do that. But it's something in your family that is kept and treasured that has no commercial. And sometimes you can't see the literacy. So Ava is doing her presentation and she does this fabulous video. And so why is that literacy? Well, behind it are all the books she's read, and she's writing in her notebooks and the letters that she's writing to me. So I'm sure that will become a treasure for her, but for her family. But the treasures are the things that have to do with language and literacy. It's impossible to take language and literacy out. It's because we talk all the time, or we write.
Can you suggest treasure type projects for this time for families, especially young families?
I think that it's a wonderful opportunity for parents as well as teachers to work with their kids and to ask them about their treasures, what's really important to them. To do it with parents first and ask them, and you'll get photographs of grandparents and some really, heart-wrenching stories, often a prayer, and sometimes a first passport. I have my mother's first driving license, and I have my father's demob paper that is all falling apart, that he was given the recommendation. It was just one line that he was a good soldier, basically. But all of us have these things, and the idea that we can talk about it. So really it is for anyone who's listening to look around their home and think, what is the most precious thing I have as a memory? And it might not be, this is an important thing, it might not be an object. After Katrina, a teacher in Louisiana did a treasures project, and she had teachers, grad students in her classes who had lost everything. And so she panicked a little bit, wondering what was going to happen. And of course, what they did was they came in and they'd written out a grandmother's recipe, or a prayer they remembered that was important. But they had memories that they started writing down, and it became a really important moment because they were gathering things that were lost. And then sharing them with an audience, other people in the class who recognized how important this moment was. So that's a really important, an important thing. The other thing parents can do with their children is do a literacy dig in their wherever they live, and collect all the different kinds of print. And we can put up categories. So if we could do that. And once again, there's always a child that doesn't have any prints. We've done this in classrooms where you've just looked what's in backpacks, etc. And there's always a child who has nothing. But for most of us, we come with washing instructions. I'm feeling for my washing. I have to have washing instructions on my. So I've gone through semesters where people have shared their washing instructions. It's very hard to get print out of our lives. But the idea of collecting family treasures that someone would look at and have no idea of the significance of that object. And I think I've told you I have coal from my grandfather's coal mine in my china cabinet. I have a kind of Welsh china cabinet over there, and cows from my nan's mantelpiece in Wales, and one of the cows is missing a leg. But they're very, very old. They must be almost 200 years old. And I'm sure no one would want those cows, but to me, they're the most precious thing I have, you know? And so that's the stuff that we need, because we need to restore the social fabric. We need to realize that many are losing their homes, they've lost their jobs. And a lot of children are, 1/3 of children in the United States are not getting enough to eat. And then you take that to countries around the world. I would say that the 2 boys and their dolls in the South Africa project, those dolls were becoming family treasures for the children.
Right.
And that's something that we need to think about. Can I just say that one of the things that is concerning me greatly is every time they talk about children going back to school, I understand social distancing, but the idea that children are at their desks and learning becomes digital, I'm really concerned that all of the 100 years of research on child development is going out of the window. And I keep hearing that children are going to need remediation because they're not going to be on grade level. But grade level is arbitrary. And these children have had experiences that are really extraordinary. And just like the teachers, you know, the family treasures gives children an opportunity. I know many classes where children have been invited to bring family treasures into the classroom. And then teachers are challenged to see how they're related to literacy. But I think we need to think very carefully, globally. This is not just an American problem, that children have been out of school. Many of them are traumatized or they're stressed. And to now say to them that they're behind, I think is inappropriate. So I'm hoping that this webinar will start conversations places about.
I'm sure it will. Denny, we just have a few more minutes. I thought this might be a nice time for you to share some words of encouragement to parents, especially parents of young families, and about what they can do to help their children through this, and to be resilient and to have hope.
Spend time and listen. Have fun. Hard to have fun if you've lost your job and you're not sure about where the food is coming from. But the whole idea of taking the pressure off, and if you hear newscasters saying that children are going to be behind, just let it wash over you. Don't take any notice, because these are just arbitrary arbitrary lines, or whatever it is that the children are supposed to cross. I homeschooled my son in 4th grade. And when we started, I took him into Bank Street and told him he could get books. And all he wanted was workbook pages. And by the second week, he was started doing workbook pages at home. And he was in charge of what he was doing. And it was only a couple of days in, he said, I don't have to do the next page, do I? I could choose a page further on. I said, sure, why don't you do that? Find one you'd like to do. And within a week, he'd given up, 3 weeks probably, his workbooks. But that's all he'd known in school. And I didn't just say, okay, no workbooks. I let him get to the point. And so, and this is really for parents, reading together, writing stories, investigating. We started a newspaper. Any way that children can be engaged in activities where they're using print. Could be on the computer. It's not that we shouldn't use them. It just shouldn't all be on the computer. And none of them should be doing workbook pages, skill sheets on the paper, on the computer at this point in time. But to get them actively engaged in problem solving. You know, Noam Chomsky's favorite question for 5-year-olds is, how come a mosquito can fly in the rain? Now, so I have not answered that question myself, but he makes the point that children need to be problem solvers. And so placing them in that kind of situation, you know, and even, I don't know if I can imagine that a child might be interested in finding all the different images of COVID, or and just doing research, taking the angst out of the pandemic by thinking about it from a scientific perspective. But you know, I mean, I wouldn't probably do that myself, but I can imagine that there would be some children. So it's have fun, find ways of sharing problems together. If you're trying to do something and you can't do it the way you've always done it because you can't get to wherever it is or whatever the problem is, share it with the child and become co-workers or co-problem solvers, and to participate, collaborate, and I think it's fine to share the things that are really you're trying to solve in your own life, as long as the problems aren't projected on the children. And that also, I think the whole idea of taking the pressure off, I think they can also, parents can say, Denny Taylor says that we don't have to worry about remediation. And
thank you.
Right. So and we are supposed to have fun, and there is research to support that. We'll put the research up.
Yeah,
Bessel van der Kolk is incredible.
I want to really thank you for this very, very special discussion time. Really precious to delve a little deeper into your background with this, and your encouragement and for the young families. We really want to thank you. I think many of us, when we think of family literacy, we think of reading, but you have expanded this so much and made it so much more relevant and helped us to understand the many, many ways we can use this within our families. And I already have a bunch of ideas that I'm going to do.
That's
So
lovely.
we're going to move on now.
Can I just thank you though?
Sorry?
Can I thank the Women's Federation because for World Peace, because it has been the most extraordinary experience.
Thank you, Denny. And as you know, we've talked about this as just the beginning. We get to do this together, but then we get to move forward with you in many, many ways. So now we're going to go back to Tamara, who will move us on to questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Alexa. That was an amazing discussion, and we got a lot of questions coming in for you. I'm going to go on to the first one from Rosie G. I'm participating in the conference from Paraguay, South America, as lack of education is one of the major concerns and causes of poverty and corruption in our region. How could the more developed countries actively support us to overcome this problem?
It's a huge question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very frustrating question too, because we don't do enough. And I think we need to take responsibility for not being actively engaged. And I feel that very strongly. I think one of the things that hopefully today's presentation will perhaps we will have programs that we will find that there are the UN becomes far more aware that by developing family literacy programs in places where people are really struggling should be a high priority. I mean, I think that all the decisions that are made by leaders should begin with family and supporting family and making sure families are okay. And of course, families aren't even mentioned, and often human rights aren't mentioned either. Mm-hmm. So Rosie, it's good that you've asked the question, because we need to step up. And I don't know how to do that except to encourage practitioners and leaders who have the power to say, okay, here is something we can do immediately. And so that's my answer. Does that make sense?
Yes, no, thank you so much. For our second question, Venezuela here. Deeply grateful for sharing your knowledge and experience. Is there a website where we can find the Family Literacy Declaration principles?
The one that I was talking about that we made, yeah. It's on my website. We pulled out, I think it's on my website. If it isn't, it will be on it by the weekend. Some of the stuff I put on Garn Press, or I have in the past, but I think the principles, it's an entire book, but we pulled out the principles, and I think they're on the website. I will make sure that they are there. Okay. And there were educators from South America who participated in the development. I don't think from Venezuela, but it should be culturally relevant.
Okay, so for our third question, which is similar to our last, this is from Christina Seher. I have a teaching credential and a master's degree in education. However, I've never heard the term family literacy. Can you please define it, and why is it not a part of the mainstream education training in the US?
Is she in the US?
Yes.
Well, so it's a really, one of the things that happened in the 80s and 90s is that the idea of phonics just took over all kinds of instruction. And so anyone that was involved in anthropological or observational work with families, I think I'm on some do not read lists, because I don't focus on atomistic skills. Mm. So there is a tension there between skill-driven pedagogy and pedagogy that embraces the whole child and looks at language and literacy in that way. And so it is quite possible that I'm getting messages. I'm so sorry. It is quite possible that her school district and her university just didn't focus. But the good news is, if you just put in family literacy and the US, you will come up with pages and pages in the search of programs that are in the United States, and many of them are creative and generative and wonderful. And many school districts do have family literacy integrated into their curriculum and use it working with families. But I've forgotten her name. I'm so sorry.
Christina.
Christina, you can do a search and you'll find them. You'll also find masses on my website that you can use, and you're welcome to send questions if you have any.
And I just want to give a shout out that her website is www.dennytaylor.com for anyone who's still wondering where to go to. And so for our next question, this is from Rosemary Pierce, and she says, when online learning during COVID first began, people suggested having students journal through the experience, but soon that idea lost steam because of the uncertain circumstances children are facing. How do you feel about this idea, and how can it best be implemented if a teacher wants to implement that strategy?
So the strategy is journaling.
Yes.
On the computer.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are no boundaries and no limits as long as children are engaged and they're finding the activities interesting, and they're not doing them because they've become chores. I think the stress on teachers right now is, I think the word is horrendous. That one of my friends who teaches at in a teacher ed program said that everyone is anxious and exhausted because teaching using the computer is incredibly tiring, I think is the word. And I think it would be better, I think, with my opinion for what it's worth, if we had said to parents that this is a really complicated time, and what we need to do is make sure our kids are okay and you're okay. And if they don't do a workbook page and that is set this year, or they don't have some skill, they're going to have other skills, and to focus on the reading together and children writing their own books, doing their own projects, starting a newspaper, doing something that really interests them, finding out why, and it has to be a different problem, because I think this is this is a really Chomsky-esque, the idea of, how a mosquito flies in the rain. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there, actually. If any parent wants to address that question with their child, there's stuff on the web. It's so the stuff with the computer could be incredibly empowering. There is so much research that could be done, and investigative reporting, and finding out things about particular games you like playing, or activities that you enjoy. I mean, there's so many ways to get a child engaged. The problem is when the work comes home and the child has to sit at the computer on his own or her own and just fill in whatever that skill sheet is, or multiple choice, all the stuff that's out there. And I just want to I'm talking too much. I just want to say that the teachers I know have been absolutely phenomenal. They're just extraordinary in trying to support their kids. And many are really desperate because they don't have the resources. And children are in situations where going to school is a safe place, etc. It's a very, very complicated, and it's complicated by poverty. The fact that we don't seem to be willing to address the massive gap between people who have resources and people who don't. You know, perhaps
Well,
because so much has come to the surface. Right.
that actually, it's interesting that you're saying that, because our next question is from Susan Kone from Kenya. Hi from Kenya. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. My question is, in this period of COVID-19, and many families are exposed to all kinds of sad news, how do we approach the education of children, especially young children, about the dangers of contracting the disease?
See, that becomes, it's a very important question, and I can imagine in local communities, families coming together. Well, we can't even come together, can we? I mean, we'd have to do it with our own family. I think that in the PowerPoint, focusing on all those symbols and the wearing of masks and the distancing, all of those, and there's masses and masses of them. And the UN is fabulous. If you go to, I go to Unsplash because they have lots of photographs, and you can get to all the UN ones there, or you can just go to the UN, and they have so many. They're graphics. They're not actually people that have to do with COVID. Now, if there is a computer or a cell phone, and you can get those images, and you can talk to children around these images that are non-threatening, they're just designs, but there's a message behind them, and I think that that's one of the ways to have a conversation with children. The one thing that's most important is to try to have those conversations without scaring them, because they're going to carry this for the rest of their lives. I don't know if that's a very good answer, but it really comes down to mothers sitting down with their children, mothers demonstrating, I'm washing my hands, come wash your hands. We have to wash our hands right now. I'm going to put my mask on. Where's your mask? You need your mask. So it's at that level, and it's done in that voice, not that voice, but one like it. You know, it's this. It's not. You have to wear a mask if you go outside. It's. And sometimes you're so frustrated that's what you're so tired.
True.
Somehow, says Tamara with three young children.
Running around and trying to make sure they have their masks before we go outside. So
Right.
it's an interesting time.
Is that a bit of a help? I know that Sesame Street is doing something, and turning off, making sure that the amount of news that the children are seeing is very, very limited. You know, some of the images are really hard for young children, but it is that you do everything you can to make sure the children feel secure, and that's not easy, and it's a huge burden on parents. You know, which is why this push from schools to keep up with what children would be doing in schools, it really needs to just be toned down.
So we only have about a minute left, so we won't be able to get to all the questions. Thank you so much for everyone who submitted. One last question I will go to is from Princess Lee Keith from Trinidad and Tobago. How can we motivate illiterate individuals to come forward for help, bearing in mind they're embarrassed?
Someone who cannot read and write. It's a very powerful question, because it isn't easy, and there is such a stigma of not being able to read and write. My grandfather didn't read and write. The thing that I would do, I would suggest as one possibility of thinking about all of the ways that this person reads the world. So they'd probably know a lot about some things, and it might be gardening, it might be in growing vegetables, and to talk about how that person knows that something is ready to, the soil is ready, and how to take care of whatever it is the person is involved in, looking at their problem solving skills and seeing that as reading the world, and then using that experience as an entrance into print literacy. Does that, I
Yes.
think that,
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, that is all the questions that we're able to take. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Denny Taylor, for answering them. And now if we would like to move over to our call of action that we would like all of our participants to get involved in. So Dr. Taylor, do you mind explaining a little bit of what you're asking for everyone to do?
we had suggested, we went around, didn't we, thinking about what everyone could do. And you heard Ava, or saw Ava. There was one slide of her where she's holding up a sign, and there's her great, I think it's about 6 greats, aunt. And she's my aunt too. It's how we come together. The idea that of interviewing an elder or writing the story of an elder and sharing it with us. So it's valuing family and in some way, helping us at this time and think about the strength of family and if that's not a possibility, then a friend, looking at an elder in a community and learning a little bit about their life and writing it down, sending a photograph and a piece of writing that tells something of the life, because that's right. It's the cohesion. It's has a lot to do with, and we'd said joyful, I think, in that. We've been doing so much in the last. I don't have it in front of me, but I think that's the thing that we were suggesting.
Yeah, so within the next day, if everyone can then go to our website at www.wfwp.org, that's where you're going to see a link to not just Dr. Denny's presentation, but also we're asking everyone to submit a story of their elder, to kind of look back into their ancestry and to discuss why that elder is so special to you.
And we also talked about if it, whoops, it's gone. Are we still broadcasting?
Yes.
Okay, because I've got the slides up. Oh, good. Oh, good. I'm sorry. I'm so inept.
No worries. No worries.
I wrote my dissertation on a typewriter, so I'm really grateful that I got through this today. But if you're doing this with a child, then it might be that the child is interviewing you, and so there are all kinds of ways to do this, and we have put it up onto.
Yeah, so it's going to be hashtag for the love of our future leaders, because we feel that it's really our elders who, or there's certain people who have inspired us to become who we are today. So I feel this would be a great project for everyone to take part in, to interview an elder, or even do some digging, or if you heard stories about a particular person, find out a little bit more, even if that person's no longer with us, like still talking to family, to just hear their stories and
engaging children in it's a wonderful thing for parents to do with their children as well. So immediately, there's an activity here that parents or caregivers can do, and this could be done with the child asking questions from an elder. What did you like to play? What was your favorite game? What was your favorite book? You can come up with the questions together, and it becomes a really wonderful family literacy project.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Denny Taylor. And I just want to thank our amazing team and all the participants. We have 285 participants registered from 30 countries. So thank you so much to everyone. Thank you so much to the team that also helped organize this. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day, the rest of the month. We're almost at June 1st, so have a great summer and hope to see everyone soon. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Oh, there we've got everyone now.